Hi, this is Steve Kaufman, and I'm really pleased to have with me today as a guest someone that I've known for a long time at various sort of meetups of language keeners, Olly Richards of storylearning.com. And hello, Olly.
Hi, Steve. Thank you.
Please allow me to say, first of all, hi. If people enjoy my videos, please subscribe, click on the bell for notifications. If you follow me on a podcast, please leave a comment. Olly.
Steve.
You and I have been involved in this whole kind of internet-based language learning thing for quite a while.
Yes.
And I want to go over some of the ways in which language learning has changed. And of course, both of us started learning languages long before this whole internet thing started. How language learning has changed, how the technology has changed, how we've had to change. So that's what I would like to talk about with you, if you agree.
I am at your service.
Okay, so before we get going, tell me a little bit about storylearning.com.
Yeah, so Story Learning is my website, it's my YouTube channel, and the whole focus of what we do is that we teach languages through stories. And this all came about many moons ago. I've always used stories and reading as a way to learn languages, but I never really thought about how I could use it as a teaching vehicle. But then I had a kind of long career teaching languages, and then I began to actually write books of short stories, which people really liked. And then so I kind of developed this concept and thought, okay, how many different ways can we teach people through stories? Much the same as the mini story at Link, but now including a big pedagogical element as well. And so nowadays, that's everything that we do. So we make courses, we write books, and everything is about stories.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And before we go further into that, of course, telling stories, in a way, our presence on YouTube is a form of storytelling. We talk about different things. We tell stories. I mentioned this to you before we started up. Here we are. I've been in, this business of, I guess my first YouTube video was, 15 years ago.
I've seen it. I remember it well.
And I was just thinking
on the chair.
Yeah. On the chair. So then I was just thinking, here I am, getting set up for my interview with you. And I thought I would describe to people what I have to do. So I have my iPad open because that's where I communicate with you. And you might describe what you do at your end. But so I'm no longer looking at you, even though you are there and I hear you through my AirPods, because in fact, I'm recording the video on my iPhone, which is located about 6 feet away from me, on a tripod. Now, the iPhone is connected into my computer because I have my computer open beside my iPad, and plugged into my computer is, first of all, a microphone, and second of all is a cable that takes me back to my iPhone, and then I use QuickTime, and I use a program on QuickTime to make sure that I'm centered, more or less centered, because I tend to be a bit sloppy in whatever I do, but I can see on my computer screen how I am centered, what actually will show up in the video. So I have to get that going. Now, the audio from my iPhone, because it's 6 feet away, wouldn't be very good. So I have my microphone plugged into my computer, and I use Audacity to record the audio. And then we merge the audio and the video files in order to get a good quality video and audio. So we are not at all dependent on the connection that we have through Zoom, because although Zoom and Skype have improved, there can be interruptions and frozen moments and, in different audio quality and so forth. One other thing is, for whatever strange reason, every time I open Audacity, I get an error message, so I always have to go through the same step of quitting Audacity, searching for it with that magnifying glass to get it up again, and then the second time I get into Audacity, it works. So just some background. Oh, and I have 3 different sets of lights here to improve the light quality. So there's a whole setup process to do these, to tell my story.
And,
How about at your end?
I guess the interesting thing about that whole setup you've got there is it didn't begin like that. It's something that's evolved over the years, and as
Yes.
and there's so many parallels between this and other things in life, aren't there? Where you just start off, your very first video, I believe, was a webcam on your computer with you just sitting on a chair, and that was that.
Mm-hmm.
Same for me. But then as we go, we add more things on. So my setup is, at the moment, so we are talking on Zoom. That's how we're doing it. And right now, I'm looking at the call itself into the laptop, which nobody can see. But I can't record with the laptop because the camera is no good. So what I do is I have my fancy DSLR camera, which I use for my YouTube videos, set up over above the screen up here. So I'm looking at the camera right now because that's how we get a nice effect for the audience who watches it later. But I can't see your face. Your face is down here, and I'm looking at the camera up here. And then linked to my camera, I have an overhead mic, which is up here, which is capturing my voice. That's linked directly into the camera. I can see over here what's coming up from the camera to make sure that it's still recording and I'm centered. And I also have 2 box lights up here, 1 backlight, and then 4 or 5 different lights in the background to light it up. And Steve, you won't be able to see that right now because you're just staring into your camera. But when you see the final result on YouTube, it will hopefully look quite good.
Yeah. I'm afraid that some of my viewers are going to say, why don't you get a setup like Olly, because his is much better than yours. So we'll see. It's in any case, we continue to evolve. And language learning continues to evolve. What do you think are some of the major sort of changes that have taken place? Say, which was the first sort of language that you, other than English, your first foreign language, which was the first one? And if you compare how, the world of language learning today to when you first started, what have been some of the main changes?
So my first language was French, and I remember working in a cafe in London when I first heard French around me and thought, well, that sounds fantastic, let's go and learn it. And so on my way home, I would stop by the European bookshop, which was then now it's in Gloucester Road. At the time, it was in Soho. And I would go back, and the only way that I knew to learn French was with textbooks, because that's what we did at school. And so I would go down into the European bookshop in Soho, and I would go down and I'd browse all of the French grammar books. You had the Complete Merde, which was the perennial French book, which was there already at the time. And then there were the Collins books, the Teach Yourself books. I don't remember what they were. And I would simply flick through the grammar books till I found one that seemed more or less what I might enjoy, and then I would work through it page by page. And that was pretty much it. Now, fast forward 20 years or so.
But subsequently, you learned Spanish, you learned Arabic, you learned a whole bunch of languages.
Yeah,
right?
and all of that was in the kind of analog methods as well. So I think because I was kind of trained in that way, I've always found personally that digitizing language learning robs me of attention, which is for me is the most valuable asset when it comes to learning anything. So I've always been quite. I've always preferred pencil and paper to anything else. The big things that have changed, I mean, the major ways that I use technology now would be for example, reading Japanese. I would read digitally always because it's just so much faster to look up either the reading of a kanji or the meaning of a kanji. And then obviously I use the internet to take language lessons, to connect with tutors, and just for general, I mean, watch movies, all the regular stuff really. But that's about it. I'm not a big one for apps. I'm a big fan of Link. I use Link on a regular basis, but I very much use the internet to connect to native speakers, to read content, and then sometimes with a little bit of help when it gets hard.
Right. Interesting. I think it's true, and I agree with you, that reading on paper is better than reading on a computer. But there are a few conditions there. It's better because there are fewer distractions, and you are basically dealing with the words, and they're not shining at you, and it's less distracting. However, I find that in my own case, I have to be at a certain level in order to be able to read on paper. So if I take an extreme example, now, of course, when I learned Chinese, there were no, computer, there was no digital text, so it was all paper. But nowadays, learning Persian and Arabic, I'm just not strong enough in Arabic. I have your book, by the way, Arabic Short Stories, and I can read them, but it's tough because the pronunciation is not obvious. The words that I don't know. So if I can read it digitally, I can hear the text-to-speech, I can look the word up. I can see in some languages, if I look the word up, say on Link, I can see a conjugating dictionary. I get a whole bunch of additional information, which I find useful. But my goal is to get to a level where I can read comfortably a conventional book. And so even in terms of, say, Slavic languages, it's easier for me to read Czech or Polish simply because the alphabet that we're more used to it's just that much easier for us to read.
Sure.
Even something like the Cyrillic alphabet, which is really not that difficult, it's still just that little bit more of a chore than reading in the alphabet that you're most familiar with. The other thing is, if I go back in history, the reason we started Link is because I had books at home in German and in Spanish, and there was always 5-10 words per page that I didn't know, and I got tired of looking them up in the dictionary, forgetting them. And so even with those languages where, let's say that there's more than 5% unknown words, I prefer even now, to read, digitally as my main means of acquiring these words. But for relaxation, even though there are words I don't know, I just skip over them and I read them in a traditional book. And I will get there, by the way, with your Arabic short stories. Thank you.
I have no doubt that you will. I always am left with the impression that when you have people such as yourself who already know how they learn languages best, and they have their method that they've perfected over many years and many languages, there's a very specific set of conditions there, and we know what we like, and we find ways to make that work. We don't bend to the technology; we got to make the technology bend to us, as it were. But I think for most people, really, I think about it as a question of just peeling back layers of difficulty one by one, and I think this is where technology is interesting how the development of technology is interesting because I don't really know so much about the app or the technology space because I just simply don't use it so much myself. But when it comes to content and the kind of content that people are making, I find that very interesting, and I think the fact that people can create content now and distribute it to a wide audience is very important because it motivates them to do so. So I could think of any number of examples of content creators on YouTube who are now making content based around comprehensible input, for example. So this is something that we are obviously big proponents of. And it's one of many different approaches to language learning. But you've got people who are making entire videos teaching French or Japanese or Spanish with comprehensible input, and they're using objects, realia as it's known. They're using whiteboards, computer screen. They're making these, and everything that they're doing is making the language slightly more accessible, one layer at a time. And that's, I think, where technology, for me, seems to be really exciting. Is the evolution of these content platforms, so that someone can be a language creator on YouTube and then earn a living from doing that, which means they can then make more. And recently we've seen this huge proliferation in the amount of useful content that's being created and is out there for free. And that's kind of a hidden way in which technology is driving things forward. Not so much in the app or software, but in just the enabling of people who are just natural teachers to teach.
I agree. And if we go into the sort of language books section of any bookstore, whether it be in Tokyo or London, there's a limited number of books that can be there, even if there's 10 different editions, living language and I don't know, any number of them. It's not going to be 100. It can only be, the store can't possibly stock 100 different books for learning these different languages. But there's no limit on the internet. There's no limit on YouTube. And so different people have different ideas of how they can help people learn, and they just put them out there.
And then you get feedback as well.
And the difficulty is actually finding them.
You get that instant feedback, so you can iterate very quickly. But when it comes to books, for example, we recently just published a book of Japanese short stories, and it's taken us, I think, from when I first raised it with the publisher, about 3 years to get it out. The length of time is preposterous, really, to take a book from. I mean, it was probably only a year,
Yeah, yeah.
a year and a half, or a year to a year and a half of actual work. But when you think about that we basically have one shot to get it right. We spend a lot of time up front, and then we put it out, and we hope that it does well, and we hope that it's useful for people. But if I were to do, say, instead of writing a book of Japanese stories, instead to say, right, I'm going to make a YouTube channel about Japanese, in that year and a half, I could be so much more attuned to what the content that people actually like, having listened to them, read their comments, tried things out. So it's an incredibly powerful dynamic. It's almost like the dynamic between a teacher and a student. You know, that feedback loop that we get all the time.
Right, and feedback loop is important. And the other thing is just the cost of getting it out there. If you spend 3 years getting your Japanese storybook out there, you'd be hard pressed to get 10,000 people to buy that book. I don't know what your numbers are, but my experience would tell me that would be a large number. You can get 100,000 views of a video on YouTube.
Yeah.
And you can make more and more videos. And so you know the economies of scale are so much better. One thing with YouTube, I'm a great believer in YouTube, by the way. Incidentally, as you know, at Link we have a browser extension where we can automatically import YouTube videos with the subtitles, the captions, and that then becomes
I didn't know you could
so
do
we are
that. Oh, that's
accessing
fantastic.
Lots. Oh yeah, I just click on it. You know, and I'm using things like I don't know. There's this, and that's another thing. You know, content creation doesn't just have to be people like yourself or Français Authentique or other people who are creating great content. There's a Jordanian television. You know, I follow this Jordanian television station in Levantine Arabic, and there's also this sort of somewhat like you know, the Flintstones type of cartoon in Jordanian Arabic, which has you know, subtitles in both English and Arabic. And so I can import that into Link. The Arabic becomes the text, but I can actually follow the video and see the English subtitles and then go through the text. And of course the text is divided, it's time-stamped, so it's sentence by sentence. I can go through listening to the cartoon characters say whatever they have to say, word by, you know, sentence by sentence, but then I can also watch the cartoon to get it over. And the cartoon is 3 minutes long. So this is content. This is tremendous learning content. So there is no limit to, I mean, I could think of more examples like that, both Netflix and YouTube, where you can bring these things into Link and use them as learning material. In fact, a lot of the stuff that I'm now seeing in both Persian and Arabic are links to this kind of content. So it's not in our library. So it's not that I'm distributing it to our members, but there is a link there that enables the member to go there and then download it into their account, so they are able to access all of this content. So, I mean, yeah, it's exploding.
What?
I have a question.
Sure.
Grammar. I was thinking about grammar the other day, and I often feel that people are sort of taught grammar before they have enough experience with the language, so that the grammar becomes, it's difficult to understand what the point is, difficult to remember these rules, you know, much less apply them. However, I find that when I'm at a certain level in the language, I do want to get closer to the grammar. I've had enough experience with the language that I understand the points they're trying to make. I've actually experienced it, you know. And I feel that there is a lack of grammar texts in the target language. Not for beginners, because beginners wouldn't be able to follow the grammatical explanation language that they're trying to learn. But when you're at a kind of almost like a B1 plus, almost B2 level, if there was a course in the target language about the grammar, not too long, audio text can be imported into Link, audio I can listen to in my car, I think that would be a great resource. Have you ever given that? So those are not stories. The stories are the key, I agree with you, because the stories is sort of the enjoyment part of getting the language into you, getting the brain used to the language. But we all want to be better. We want to be more accurate in our use of the language. But if we could make the grammar learning also meaningful input in the target language, I think that would be
sure. Well, I mean, we do
thoughts?
almost exactly that at storylearning, actually. So what we have, and you can tell me whether this is whether I'm describing what you have in mind here. But so we run these monthly challenges. So we have They are 30 days long. And basically, so what we do is we will take a grammar point in a language, a tricky grammar point. So say, for example, the difference between the past tenses in Spanish, which is a perennial problem. And so we will write a story that's 30 chapters, 30 days long, based on which focuses heavily on that grammar point. And so the idea is that, so in this case, the two past tenses. And so the idea is that you spend 30 days on a daily basis reading content that features that grammar point very heavily, and then through by force or input and repetition and frequency, you end up just kind of developing that natural feel. And we find it works really well because as you said, the barrier there really is it's getting used to the way that grammar works, and it's developing. I mean, I can't tell you how often I've had this experience of thinking that I know the grammar of a language fairly well, but never quite being able to use it in speech, and then going off and spending a year reading in the language and coming back and suddenly finding, without having done any extra study, that the grammar just rolls off my tongue more naturally than before. Yep. It's simply a question of exposure over time, frequency and exposure. I mean, there really is no other element to it. But that can be quite a tough pill to swallow for someone who's coming at it new, because it's never the case that you can kind of chart your development or your progress against days or hours of study. You just have to just dive in, surround yourself by it, and then just trust that you will then develop the knowledge as you go.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think the brain, we underestimate the brain. The brain has the capacity to establish rules, create patterns, connections. And so after a year of reading, you're going to naturally use the language more correctly. But some things you won't notice. And so we all know people who have lived in Britain or Canada for 30 years and still make the same fundamental mistakes in English that reflect their native language. But they're still getting more, or they've reached a certain level at least, where much of what they say in English is grammatically correct. So the brain will form patterns. And to that extent, I agree with you that lots of listening and reading is going to help the brain form patterns that are increasingly correct. But there are things that we don't notice. And I think when we start into the language, some sort of overall description of how the language works in English is kind of helpful, as long as we don't try to remember any of it, because we can't. But it kind of helps us, although certain things are immediately obvious. The verb comes at the end. You almost don't need to be told that. You'll figure that out pretty quickly.